welcome back everybody to our second to last session of the day. Today we have Tori and Laurel joining us from UC San Diego Library Special Collections and Archives. So Tori Maches is a digital archivist in UC San Diego's Library Special Collections and Archives and Scholarship Tools and Methods program. She collaborates with teams within and outside of these programs to preserve and provide access to born digital archival materials, including web archives. Laurel McPhee is a supervisory archivist within UC San Diego Library Special Collections and Archives program, where she leads and collaborates with teams to make collections of personal papers, organizational records, unique audiovisual resources, and digital objects preserved and accessible. Laurel earned her AB from Harvard and Cambridge, Massachusetts, and her MLIS from the University of California, Los Angeles. And I'll turn it over to them. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Hello and welcome everyone to our presentation. I'd like to take a moment to thank each and every person in the audience for joining us today. We realize we are the second to last presentation in what has been a very content-rich 3-day symposium all about email. So if you're here and ready to absorb still more information, first, we are really impressed. And second, we're just really grateful for your attendance and engagement today. So you can place a face with our voices as we speak. In case you don't have the speaker view up, here we are. On the left is Tori Maches, our digital archivist, and I'm on the right. My name is Laurel McPhee, and I'm the supervisory archivist. And Tori and I work together here at the UC San Diego Library. To set the stage, we will share a true confession as to where we were prior to last year in processing email at UC San Diego. Email processing had been identified as a strategic goal for years, and on an annual basis, when it was time to establish goals, figuring out email was always on the list. We knew the collections where it was lurking, and we definitely felt an urgency to do something about it. And we weren't neglecting the goal. We did invest significant resources in email projects, especially with EPAD. EPAD had been tried and explored by staff members with different collections. We had spent a lot of time and energy on it. And while we found the appraisal module was time-consuming to use, more importantly, it seemed we were having trouble integrating EPAD into our existing public services workflows and preservation systems. So despite a lot of investigation, we still didn't have a clear deliverable that we could share with public services, easily make available in our reading room, or ingest into our dams, which is backed up by Chronopolis, our preservation layer. So in essence, we're working on it, had become the status quo or a permanent state. And today we're going to share how we broke through that roadblock today.
All right, thanks, Laurel. I'll just do a quick walkthrough of what our presentation will include and how it will take us through moving our process from more of a tool-first approach to email forward into a strategy and collection-first way to make email available to researchers. So we will start with our aha moment where we figured out that we could apply concepts we already knew to processing email. And then processing email that showed up incidentally in our collections as screenshots or text. Then we'll go into our use of Mailbag to facilitate preservation and access, tailoring our approach to our institutional context and UX model. And finally, extensibility, how to apply this process to your own institutional contexts and your own collections. We've all seen case studies and gone, that's great. Maybe I could do that at my institution if I ever had the staff, technology, expertise, resources. So we hope that the end of our presentation will be a time for folks to discuss where they are with email processing and bring in other ideas from earlier in the symposium. And with that, I will pass it over to Laurel to get us started.
Thank you, Tori. So our email breakthrough was actually sparked by something kind of unexpected. Tori and I were collaborating on processing a collection of digital documents that had been donated on a hard drive by the Insight Arts Collective in Mexico City. Insight administrators had painstakingly set up folders of files on the hard drive to organize all of their documentation. We had all different kinds of file types in this collection, and we were expecting to find email. But when we drilled down to the email files, we were really surprised to find that the artists had actually created screenshots of their emails and saved them to the hard drive as PNG files. So at first, we had a really good laugh about this. We were like, oh my gosh, these emails are PNG, and we were sad about all the metadata that had obviously been lost in this approach. We basically had pictures of email and not real email. But at the same time, we realized this made processing the files according to our already established workflows for digital collections really easy. Because we had permission to make this content available to the public, our goal with this whole hard drive was to ingest the files into our DAMs and publish it through our digital collections website, which is the public-facing window into our DAMs holdings. To do this, we had already migrated most of the document and image files to PDF to generate access copies, saving the original as an alternate file type or as a backup, zipping it up as part of the digital object. And this process was obviously really easy to do with PNGs. The donor had created folders of email threads captured as PNG, so we ran a conversion to PDF, compiled the individual email screenshots together into little PDF bundles, and zipped up the originals to store as backups. We adapted the donor-created folder name for each batch of emails as the title of the digital object. Then we ingested each of these objects into our DAMs, where it's searchable from the project collection page. So here you'll see a screenshot of what one of these sample email objects with its associated metadata looks like in our DAMs. This little snippet of Born Digital content represents just one series and a much larger hybrid Insight collection. And in the finding aid for this series, we simply provide a link to the DAMs where all of the content is keyword searchable. Once we had practiced kind of taking this PNG lemon and making lemonade, we felt much more confident the next time we faced email that also wasn't PST or Mbox. In one of our poetry manuscript collections from a key faculty member, we knew we had email saved on a hard drive since approximately the year 2000. When we were processing the hard drive content, we found the email, we saw it was saved as text files. That's how it had been originally saved. We could easily open these documents in LibreOffice or Notepad, so reading the files was not a problem. And since they weren't Mbox or PST, and we'd had success with the PNG files, we didn't even try to work with these in EPAD. We followed the model that we set for Insight. We converted each folder of text emails into one compiled PDF, and the original text files were zipped up as a backup alternate. And then these objects were ingested into our DAMs. For this collection, we do not have permission to make this content freely available or downloadable to the public. So here we took advantage of the virtual reading room technology layer in our DAMs, which allows for documents to be fully keyword searchable for discovery, but not available to view or download until a user first registers with us and makes a request through Aon. Once the request for a file is received by public services, they can release the file via a link to the user for a limited period of time in a viewer that doesn't allow downloads and also has a pretty substantial watermark on the image. So the work on these two collections really set the stage for changing how we would approach email. When we weren't getting tripped up by focusing on really specialized format-specific tools, email became a lot easier to work with. And we thought, well, what even when we do have Mbox files, we can still rely on this method of simply creating access PDFs to present to users. And right around this time, Tori had just taken a training on a tool called Mailbag. So we decided to try that out with those goals in mind. And so next, Tori's going to share how we used Mailbag and our new workflows on one of our most important email collections.
Thanks, Laurel. First, I will give a quick refresher of Mailbag before we jump into our test collection. I don't want to go into too much detail since it's already been highlighted several times at the symposium, but that said, if you didn't make the Mailbag sessions, Mailbag is a project from the University at Albany that facilitates preserving email in multiple formats packaged together to take advantage of different features of the email format. So Mbox for the original email, PDF for text content, work for embedded URLs. And this multi-format approach really helped in our particular use case. Since we wanted to preserve the email in multiple formats, the Mbox as our preservation original, and then a PDF access copy that would be full text searchable, and we could serve it up to users. We didn't have any attachments or live websites since these emails were from the mid to late 1990s. So we didn't need to worry about other formats. We also wanted to keep the email in its original order, but still represent it as a bunch of separate messages instead of one big text file with limited differentiation. So Mailbag's generating one PDF per email, numbered chronologically, really helped us present that mimicry of the original order. So now that I've walked you through a little bit of background, let's get into our guinea pig collection. Our guinea pig collection is the poet Jackson McLow's email. Mid to late 20th century poetry is a major collecting area for special collections and archives, and McLow is one of the highest use collections in our archive for new poetry. We'd already processed McLow's other born digital materials like drafts, typed correspondence, and a fun one, computer programs that he collaborated on and created with other composers and poets to use in their work. So at this point, all that was left was the email. These were largely newsy, detailed messages with his personal and professional circles, so we knew it would be valuable to researchers, and we didn't want to sit on it while we waited for a perfect access solution. The files consisted of over 8,000 email messages on 3 zip disks. McLow had meticulously organized these messages into folders by correspondent, including both incoming and outgoing messages in chronological order. He exported these folders from Eudora and Juno, the 2 email clients he used, as Mbox files in the late 90s. So where did we start in getting all this done? As I mentioned, each Mbox file was one folder of email with one correspondent, varying in size from 1 message to hundreds, depending on who he was talking to. Inboxes and outboxes, meanwhile, could be thousands of files. Making things more complicated, there was substantial duplication and overlap between these folders, since he exported the same folders at different times to back up his email over a period of 3 years. So we had multiple versions of the same folder. And finally, some of his business correspondence contained PII or other sensitive information. So our workflow needed to include deduplication and scanning for and redacting protected material before we could convert our Mbox files for access. We decided to only intervene at the folder level and keep any folder that contained any unique material. I wrote a Python script that broke the Mbox file up into messages and compared the messages in different versions of the same folder. If a folder contained no unique messages, we didn't keep it. If it overlapped with other folders but still had any unique messages, we kept the entire thing. We also scanned for and redacted PII. At this point, it looked like we were ready to go, until we realized that since the files were from the late 90s and the Mbox format wasn't standardized until later, they didn't look quite like modern Mbox files, and Mailbag it couldn't always parse them. So what this meant in practice was that I needed to do things like create working copies of the Mbox files where I could edit headers, metadata, line length in cases where a paragraph had no line breaks and cut off at the margin, and address other formatting issues before finally using Mailbagit to convert a problem file. So to give you a sense of what this looked like, here's one message from one mbox file. This one didn't need a ton of troubleshooting. The paragraphs do all have line breaks. The metadata is enough for Mailbagit to work with. The only change that I needed to make here was something that most files needed, even if they didn't have other problems. So the header at the beginning of the message, indicating that this is a new message, didn't have a line break before it. So sometimes it would go straight from, say, the signature on the previous email straight into this from header. So Mailbagit couldn't always catch when there was a new message. So I did need to insert a line break before each message header to make sure that all of these messages were treated as separate items. So since one mbox file could be one message or thousands, and they all needed at least some intervention, it was crucial to find some balance between automation and manual fixes. So with a heavy skew toward automation. So whenever I could, I automated this with Python scripts. So now that I've walked you through the process, here's how the result looked. You'll see the original, completely unedited mbox version of this message on the left, and the PDF version on the right, and Mailbagit generated the formatting. So once we generated these message level PDFs, we combined them. So instead of having a folder full of separate messages, we had a merged PDF that corresponded to an mbox file. In cases where we had a much larger folder, say his whole inbox or outbox, we split those large PDFs into smaller files for ease of use, rather than throw a 2,000-page PDF at a user. And finally, we ingested the preservation mbox files and access PDFs into our DAMs for preservation and access. And this is where things got much more tool-centric. Our DAMs UI heavily influenced our choices in how we named, packaged, and split files. We tried to replicate the original structure in what we presented to users, but we had to balance that with still making it as searchable and accessible as possible. So I will give you a quick show and tell of what that looked like. Here is his inbox in our DAMs spanning from December of 1998 to December 1999. So as you can see, it is divided up into pieces by date, because it's almost 2,400 emails. So each of these components here is about 200 emails, not pages, but emails. Some of them are several hundred pages. And a user can just click through either here on the side or with these arrows to find the time period that they're looking for. So now I'll pass it back to Laurel to talk about applying this kind of process outside our specific institutional and collection context.
Thank you, Tori. So with that overview of what the Mailbag tool could do for us, you might be thinking, well, that works for them, but we don't have a DAMS, or we don't use our institutional repository that way, or perhaps you don't have a VRR or virtual reading room type layer of technology that's ready to use. So you think, well, what does having a bunch of PDFs do? But the key takeaway here is that you don't need to let all of the potential of mbox and all the cool stuff you could be doing with mbox if only you had X, Y, or Z, or if only you've mastered EPAD. We encourage you to bring your workflows back down to earth with what you already have. So you can store access files and bagged originals on your staging server, your secure computer site or server where you store other digital collections, and copy them over to a secure computer in your reading room for on-site researchers. You can bag and bundle your Access PDFs and the originals in your preservation space using whatever software or protocols you already use for preserving other digital files. Basically, whatever you've worked out for born digital records of other types and formats, you might be able to use for email if you're creative. We felt that having fairly straightforward public access enabled was kind of a gold standard for us. It was something we wanted to achieve because that allows users to do their own keyword searches across records and mine the content of the messages on their own. I recognize that full public access is fairly unusual for email collections, but it's great to enable users to exploit the fact that email is a digital record and have them be able to keyword search it, even if you do have to mediate delivery. So you have to approach each email project with an iterative, kind of very practical goal mindset. And we recommend that's where you start. Define exactly for email what process means for you and your team, because there's really not just one definition, although there's infinite gold standards you can reach towards. So we urge you to pick what standards are appropriate and attainable for you and see if you can reach them with just 1 or 2 guinea pig collections of email. And you can start with like really simple goals, like get the files off of legacy media, such as floppy disks, CDs, or hard drives. And if you get through that step, you can pat yourself on the back because you are 1 step closer to managing your files. Is a processing goal to make it available? Think about your audience and to whom. Ask yourself, available in what way? What does an appropriate level of access or suitable level of access look like? Then you start thinking about maybe discovering how access copies can work for you. Do you serve them up just in your reading room, or do you have some ability to promote remote access? If you want to make the email available online, PDFs and text files are really your friend because your users are going to be able to interact with them and search them using software they already have on their home computers. So based on our experience, having a goal of using ePad or using Mailbag is not a processing goal. It's an important maybe a learning point or a training goal for you or your team, but it's kind of separate from processing. You have to think about the collection first and then find the tools that help you achieve what a processed state is for that content. And only you or your team can define that for your repository. So for example, once we had gained experience working with email converted to PDF and therefore easy to put into our DMs in the Insight and Rothenberg collections, we were able to visualize much more clearly what we wanted to achieve with McPhee. First, we knew we had to get the email off the zip drives. That's a fundamental baseline goal we have for all of our born digital collections. We also knew that we needed to preserve the original mbox files, of course, even if they were old, unstandardized, little wonky, tricky to work with. We wanted to make every step of our processing fully reversible for future generations. Next, we wanted to make the email files keyword searchable because there's so many of them, and McPhee was a very literary person who wrote wordy, fluent, very insightful correspondence. We knew that just providing folder level access alone, using McPhee's kind of cryptic folder titles that he created, would really limit folks' ability to find what they were looking for. And we weren't interested in a discovery module that only showed people basically an email that's entirely redacted. We really wanted to facilitate that keyword searching, and we wanted to get the mbox files into our preservation system. So at UCSD, those wants, those desires meant we had to find a way to get email into our DMs. Getting stuff into the DMs isn't the goal, but facilitating keyword searching and ingesting the files into our preservation layer was the goal. And for us, that means it has to be in our digital asset management system. And the last thing we really wanted to attain was to allow the users to find the email or stumble across it in a traditional search within the McPhee finding aid, as well as on the digital collections website. So here you'll see a screenshot of our online HTML macro finding aid, very traditional, rich finding aid. We created a digital materials series. There was a lot of diversity in the digital files we processed for this collection. So sometimes we'll separate out digital files intellectually into where they belong based on content, but for this collection, it just made sense to keep it all together. And as you can see, we tried to make the links to the files in the DAMs very obvious, easy to find, easy to click on. And also at the top of the finding aid, we have a bright orange view online button. We have that for every finding aid that has content in our DAMs. So if a user clicks on either these links here or that bright orange button at the top of the finding aid, they're taken to the Maclo digital selections collection. And from there, they can keyword search the whole corpus and request through the VRR to view any of these documents. We also added the terms electronic mail and with the variant term email as controlled genre terms, and also added name authorities for all of the major correspondence. You can probably work more easily with Access PDFs when serving email files in your reading room too. While an online DAMS with mediated access is a great thing, and we love that we have that technology, you can also do a lot with traditional description and providing on-site access only. It's better than doing nothing at all because you're stuck on a speed bump somewhere else. So here's an example from a collection where we salvaged emails from 1996 and 1997 off of floppy disks. While we could have followed the model we worked out for Maclo and put this content in the DAMs, it's still a lot of work, right? So in this case, we're in a collection where we didn't expect very heavy use at all. We simply generate and save the access copies of the emails as PDF on our controlled internal server that Public Services has access to. And we describe these emails very succinctly in the finding aid. Users can request it via what you see our little Aeon checkbox layer on the finding aid. And when they select the digital files to request, they're not taken via a link to the DAMs or a website. That request carries forward through Aeon, just like it would a box of paper. And then they can make an appointment, again, just as they would with paper materials, to come to our reading room and view the PDFs on a lockdown computer in our reading room.
So just to sum it all up, it's not about what tools you use or what process you use. It's about what you want to provide to your users and how to do that given the resources you already have. And once you get past the must-haves, you start to understand which specific tools might come into play. So for example, important things to provide in your processed email might be facilitating keyword search for ease of use, especially in a large corpus of email, or making files easy to share with users following reasonable screening criteria or risk assessment, preserving originals and access copies, or providing seamless discoverable description for users instead of describing it a little less well and just sort of hiding the email in the collection. So with that, I will pass it over to Laurel to kick off our discussion.
So we thought, since we are nearing the end of our 3 days together, we are absolutely happy to answer any specific questions about our work or our process, but we'd also encourage you to share any of your experiences that kind of parallels ours. And so we just put these prompts together to get folks thinking. If you're in a tool rut and thinking of a way around, up and over a roadblock, we'd love to hear about it. Also, that integration of access and preservation technology layers has come up over and over these last few days. I hope our talk has shared how we kind of bridge that gap a little bit using the technology we had here. And of course, we're always interested in learning or seeing or hearing from people who are also linking to email files directly from finding aids or traditional forms of description.
while we wait for someone to be brave enough and go off mic, we do have a few questions from in the Q&A. So could you share how you redacted PIIs?
Yeah, sure. So in our case, our campus IT department had us use a specific tool for all PII search and redaction. So campus IT had us use Spirion, but then from there it got a little bit more complicated because that tool only redacts Microsoft Office Suite files. So from there, I had to go to that part in the Mbox file and just remove that text and then save a new copy. So a little bit hacky, but that's the only case where the preservation copy is not the exact original, is cases where it's the original, but with, say, McLow's social security number redacted.
Thanks. Our next question is from Nathan. Have you had any feedback from researchers on using email in your DAM collections?
No, we haven't, because we finished this project like 2 months ago. When we were, Tori spotted the invitation to present at this symposium, and we had been actively working on the McPhee email. We thought, this is perfect. This is going to really make us hustle and have it done by the time of the symposium. So we look forward to hearing, especially it would be to our public services specialists, how the mediated requests are going. It's pretty easy because those requests come in object by object and are approved through Aon. We can track the statistics on use pretty easily. For the collections that are completely public, we just use Google Analytics from our DAMs. So we gain some level of awareness of the level of use, but we don't have the opportunity through those numbers to really ask folks, are you finding what you're looking for? How is engaging with this object serving your research needs? Those are all good questions, and we're hoping once the mediated requests start being facilitated, we can get some more feedback from users.
Feedback pending then.
Feedback pending, yeah, fingers crossed.
A question from Sarah. It sounds like you might have a very clear born digital policy that guides you well. Can you share it?
I can take this one. We do have a born digital policy, which it's more of a recent development though. Laurel and I were both on the working group that drafted the policy. And I think it's on our website. Yes. Okay. So, Laurel, do you want to get the link or should I get the link?
Yeah, are you thinking of the digital collections policy, or was the question more about like processing and internal controls?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could clarify that. We also basically just apply a lot of the concepts that we use processing paper records to born digital as well. So that helped us when we didn't have something as codified.
But I think like a lot of institutions, we are like riding on the train as the track is being laid. We're no different than a lot of other repositories and teams in that way, which is, you know, why I shared our many years, our strategic goals of working on email, and that we worked on it, but we didn't seem to get anywhere. And so yes, we have been actively working on both internal and public facing policies, but I think really what's helped us is getting more and more familiar with the workflows that seem to produce a result that's clear, easy to use, works within the kind of the ecosystem of tools and discovery layers that we have without bringing in a third rail or a whole new way of doing things or a whole new discovery point. Once we realized we could put email in the DAMs via these access PDFs, it was a game changer. It sounds kind of elementary, but for a long time, we were like, we can't put email in the DAMs because how will people download or engage with that file? And once we realized a bridge was access PDFs, that really helped us over that roadblock. So it wasn't necessarily a policy that got us there. But now we have an internal workflow that we can follow, kind of a roadmap for future collections, because everyone is a little bit different, but now we have a roadmap.
And would you be open to sharing that roadmap? Somebody asked if you would be open to sharing your Born Digital Processing Guide for emails, or essentially the roadmap that you just described. And just thank for your presentation, which has been very useful to, I'm sure, many people here.
Yeah, I think especially if you email either of us, our emails are at the first slide, we'd be happy to share some of our internal documentation.
Yeah.
Our next question from Jessica, she said, how cool, what system are you using for your access system? And also, what are you using for your preservation system? Oh, I think somebody answered this question for you with a link.
Yep, there it is.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so we have an in-house system, preservation system. We use Chronopolis, which is in-house system that UC San Diego has. And then for access, similarly in-house, I want to say it's sort of a like mutant Samvera, but there's been so much iteration on the DAMs over the past few years, just since I was hired, that, and it'd probably be better to just check it on our website.
Yeah, it's a homegrown DAMs and it's always evolving, but there's really good documentation for it on the UC San Diego library website. If you Google that phrase plus DAMs, you'll see documentation that's probably soon to be outdated because we're working on a new iteration right now.
So our next question, how are you quantifying extent for the bundles of email / PDFs in your finding aid?
In our DAMs level description, it's by number of messages. In the finding aid, I have been so focused on the DAMs description that the finding aid is eluding me. Let me just double check.
Yeah,
or Laurel can take this.
Yeah, so when you're looking at a digital object in our DAMs, you will see in the extent field with the metadata, the number of emails, and that is collected auto-magically by Mailbag-it, if I remember correctly, or Tori was able to harvest that number through her Mailbag processing. So we were not literally counting emails at any point. But on the finding aid side, I don't think we give the total number of emails in a list. Because this collection has a lot of other digital content, it has thousands of other documents, Word docs, computer programs. And so we just followed kind of our typical boilerplate description, which is the top level description extent field gives the total number of gigabytes in the collection. And then if someone clicks on the Maclo digital collection, you get a much more nuanced kind of faceted view of the types of documents and types of objects, if that makes sense. So there's nowhere in the finding aid where we give, this includes 7,000 emails. We figure it's much more meaningful at the object level for people when they're about to click on something or about to request something, if it's going to be like a fat, juicy file with hundreds or thousands of emails, or if it's just two. That's where we feel the number comes in really handy for folks.
Yeah, and basically what I did to get the email extents was Mailbag-it numbers all of the individual message PDFs. So the file names are just 1.pdf, 2.pdf. So yeah, either hold the last number, or when I was trying to do it in bulk, I just got the number of files in that PDF folder. And yeah, we really wanted users to know what they were in for when they got to the object level, especially for his whole inbox.
So another question from Pamela, that sorry if I missed this at the beginning, but it sounds like you did not use ePad at all to process these emails. Is that correct? Did you try out the tool and decide not to?
So we had tested ePad a few different times in fits and starts since, I want to say, about 2016, 2017. And we just had a hard time, since it was a third discovery portal and just a third another ecosystem on top of what we were already using. We had a really hard time trying to figure out how to integrate it into our existing preservation and access systems. So for this case, since we tried so many times, and with other collections or with test collections, and we really didn't want us having a hard time figuring out how to work ePad into our ecosystem. We didn't want to make that be the only roadblock to accessing these emails. So we decided not to try ePad for this collection and use Mailbag and Mailbag it instead. Because that way we could provide access to the files in the short term without trying again with, I think it would be the biggest corpus of emails that we had ever tried with ePad if we went that route.
And this is a good segue to the next question. Could you speak to how long this collection took you to process?
I think we probably worked on the email portion, like from the first brainstorming session to DAM's ingest was complete. It was probably 6 months. That probably spanned the winter holidays. But but that being said, we were working on a lot of other things at the same time. So it was not like a full-time 100% focus on this project while other things were on the back burner. It kind of fit in very harmoniously to all the other processing we were doing. And it just kind of simmered along as we did our other Born Digital processing, and on my team, we're still doing lots of paper processing. But yeah, it was not instant. But I felt Tori and I had weekly, hourly check-ins on it. And I felt like pretty much every week, something got done that would just nudge it forward. And sometimes we would take a couple of weeks off from working on it super actively and then get it back on track. So a little bit of constant work for probably about a 6-month time span. Does that sound about right, Tori?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think it got much quicker towards the end because we were really figuring out how to do this while we were doing it. Like I had gone to a mailbag workshop at DLF DigiPrez, and so I'd played around with it a little bit, but I've never used it at a scale like this. And the email was so wonky in some ways that it really was the first folders took much longer than the last folders to get through, because by that point we'd figured out, we knew all of the known issues, we knew what we'd done in previous cases, so it was just a matter of chipping away at it while we did other work too.
And we wanted to add a few bells and whistles, like because he's such an important person within his circle of poets, he corresponded with important people. And we thought, oh, it'd be really nice to add authorized names to the metadata, since the only other thing we're offering is keyword searching, and so that took a little bit of time, but we just had a CSV of all the major correspondence that we had harvested and just kind of went through the list, like, oh, that's Douglas Meserly, oh, that's so-and-so, and just looked up the LOC or VIAF names, plugged them in. So we tried to add a little bit of value to it through those types of means too. And that all took a little bit more time.
Our final question is, do you think your success with these collections will result in increased collecting of email at your institution?
I hope so.
I think increased collecting happens whether we're ready or not.
Yes, definitely.
It's coming.
Yes. And honestly, that was something that made it challenging for us to figure out what to do with email at first, was because we just had whatever we knew about that was in the backlog. With McLow, we didn't know that this email was here until we got to the zip disks and looked at the files and went, oh, there's multiple versions of his email client in here. He was a dedicated email backer-upper, and yeah, we didn't know it was there. So email has been coming in over the years. We are still finding it, and now we have a better idea of what to do with it. And yeah, email is just going to come in, but now we're more ready for it.
And I think what's great too is we now have a very public facing example of what we can show potential donors of. If you give us your email, this is what can happen to it. Because I think a lot with born digital records of all types, people are really happy to pass off a hard drive or FTP files, but they don't really know what the archivists are going to do with it. There's this weird gap in understanding. And now we can say, look, here's an example of email that we've processed and made available. This is how you can interact with it and request it. These are this types of screenings and risk assessment we can do. It's a very nuts and bolts example we can show, instead of keeping it in some abstract or very technology focused layer.
Well, it sounds like a very successful guinea pig project collection. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Yeah.